Leah, where are you, Leah? Leah Robinson? I'm trying to find everybody. There you go. So Leah is a professor at the University of Michigan in the School of Kinesiology, correct?
Yes. Mhm.
And she works a lot with children. And again, full disclosure, she's right across the street, so I can wave at her. Hi, Leah.
Hello.
And then we have Naomi Andre. And Naomi is coming us straight from her bedroom where her foot is propped up because she broke her ankle this week. And Naomi is an expert on, she's also a professor at the University of Michigan in the arts and science, where I have a degree from 1968, cum laude. So, I want to be bragging on myself here. And now Naomi has just written a book called, what's the title, Naomi? It's about Black in the opera, but.
Sure, Black opera history, power, and engagement. And it's about how opera is doing some funky things, particularly in South Africa, the US, Europe, and how their topics, sort of new operas that have been written as well as things from the past that look at Black experiences in opera.
Naomi, would you consider the play about Hamilton opera?
I mention it. The book just came out. Yes, I love it. I finally got to see it on Disney because I couldn't afford to go and bring my family, but it's amazing and is doing really operatic things with the way music keeps, like the themes keep coming back and the drama continuing. Absolutely. And opera and musical theater. I have got a section that looks at Beyonce's Carmen, a hip opera in there. So it's pretty wide what I talk about.
All right. And Naomi, I have to tell you that introduction to opera for little kids, my 4 and 6-year-old granddaughters both know every word from Hamilton. So
absolutely great. Yes, my 11-year-old does. Yes.
Yeah. So we heard giving up my shot a lot.
Not gonna do it. Yeah.
And let's see, we have Elke Lipka. Elke is CEO and president and head honcho at TSRL, which is a therapeutic drug development accelerator. Could you maybe describe what that is, Elke, so I get it right?
TSRL stands for Top Secret Research Laboratory, since we're a secret society here, So I can't tell you exactly what we do here, but no, you got it pretty much right. We're helping academic investigators with drug ideas to go through the preclinical development and get ready for the clinic and transition in the private sector. And we're focused on infectious diseases.
Great. So I've been going to Elke and her crew a lot to get information about COVID because they understand infectious diseases and they understand. What is your prediction, Elke, about how long we're going to be locked down here?
Oh, I think we're going to open up in April or May, but I also think we're going to be wearing masks in public places probably for another year to year and a half. So I think it'll be quite gradual.
Okay, great. And Lisa Berry is right there. Lisa, you want to say hi? Lisa is a voice very familiar to all of us because she does the drive time on WEMU. And she also has an amazing program on Thursdays on EMU called Heart and Soul. Is that correct?
Heart and Soul.
Heart and Soul. And can you say a little bit about that show, Lisa?
Sure. I'm the local host of All Things Considered, NPR's All Things Considered. So I'm on the air every afternoon from like 4 to 7. I do a lot of different interviews for the radio station. Yesterday, I'm name dropping Yamiche Sindor, who, if you watch PBS or MSNBC, she's going to be Eastern's MLK speaker this year. So I try to connect with the community. I've interviewed a lot of doctors. I've tried to keep everyone up to date on the pandemic. But Art and Soul, every week, we either look at the visual arts or the performing arts or the culinary arts. And my personal passion is the art of well-being. I sort of beg them to let me do that segment. And so once a month, I get to connect to people like Dr. Pasick, and there's so many great minds in our community and so many people involved in well-being that you all need to get together. Because I've had the privilege of connecting to people at the Ross School of Business, and then there's meditation teachers and there's thought leaders, and there's a lot. It's a big component of our community. So that is my true bottom line passion of what I'm doing on the air. But I love
Lisa,
talking.
you should connect I'm also a connector. You should connect with, among other people here, Marvin Parnes. Marvin, can you say what you've done in the arts? I know you've headed something for quite a while there. Unmute.
Hi. Well, I had the privilege of being the executive director of the Alliance for the Arts and Research Universities, which has worked across the country at promoting the centrality and significance of the arts across all areas of education. And I've been chair of the Board of Trustees of the Ann Arbor Summer Festival, which is navigating these challenging times and hopes to continue. Please check us out on the website. And then I helped launch the new University of Michigan Arts Initiative, which is again a comprehensive campus-wide effort on promoting the arts as a central feature of knowledge, education, research, social change. So I've had just a wonderful time working on those areas as a kind of capstone. So thank you.
Lisa, you got your program set up all the way through April here, I think, just with these folks.
I talk to Mike Mickelon all the time, and I've emceed at Summer Festival, and there was a big void in my life this past summer without it. Is it looking good for the next summer? Are we hopeful?
Yeah,
Yeah,
who knows, huh?
Yeah.
All right, well, I'm sorry for a few people that I haven't introduced. We're kind of running out of time, but Leah, are you ready?
Sure. Sure.
Okay.
Well, good morning. Thank you for being here, and thank you for welcoming to the Secret Society, Rob, for presenting, and just talking about how Martin Luther King Jr. has influenced myself over the years. We all know how, the work of Martin Luther King Jr. and how he has paved a way for human rights and a civil rights movement. His work continues to impact a lot of groups today, and it helped to shape, my family's history along with my trajectory. With the civil rights movement, it helped provide my parents the opportunity to attend a four-year university. They later went off to obtain graduate degrees, and King work, focused on ending segregation in public schools, voter protection, employment discrimination, protecting employment discrimination, wages for middle-class family. So it was their education that helped them secure jobs, that provided a lot of financial security for our family. And that allowed my parents to provide my sisters and us and myself with the resources, opportunity, and education to be well-rounded individuals that went off to go to college and universities and be productive in contributing members to society. So his work from the civil rights movement greatly impacted myself and our family. However, we're still now 60 years past the civil rights movements and the March on Washington. And I ask myself a lot is, have we made enough progress, especially with what's happening recently? As a woman and a person of color, we still struggle with equality. I can remember, 4 years ago when I marched for the Women's March in Washington. I think it was January the 21st, the day after inauguration, where we, advocated for legislation and policies that protected human rights. Women's rights, immigration reform was a theme of the march, healthcare, reproductive rights, protecting the environment, LGBTQ, racial equality, a range of issues. And those were, some of the center themes of the civil rights movement and King's work of, human rights for everyone. We still face a lot of disparities and injustices in many areas. That was a center of the civil rights movement. We have a greater educational gap. Right now with COVID, it's probably going to get even worse with, discrepancies of individuals with online learning between rural and urban, high and low SES. There's a bias in the criminal justice system that needs to be reformed and addressed. And there's, a lack of upward mobility in the middle class families, not seen anymore as what it was in the 70s and in the 80s. And, that's just to name a few. So, when I reflect back on King's work, we have made great progress as a society and as a nation, but I do think we have a long way to go to really achieve his overall vision that he had for people and for human rights. So.
Thank you, Leah. And you said your parents were educated. What were their parents? What did they do?
My mother started off as a teacher, and she ended up being a high school principal. So she was in administration, public school administration. And my father was military at one time, and then went to college. But he had a contracting company, so he was a construction contracting company for the military.
They were a success story in the South then, in terms of what they were able to achieve compared to their families before them.
Exactly. Yeah. And, paved the way for my sisters and I, and hopefully we will, pave the way for the next generation of Robinsons. Yeah.
Thank you. Next, we're going to go to Elke, and Elke is going to give us a little bit of perspective, because having grown up in Germany, talking about the influence of the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King, and how it was perceived from Europe.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, so when Rob first approached me to come on this panel, I felt like I really didn't fit quite the mold, and didn't really, I'm certainly not a scholar of Dr. King's teachings, and haven't been, come to the US when I was 27. So even my history education had elements of the American history, but certainly not the depth and the knowledge that I acquired actually over the past year. I've always been very aware and have been fighting for women's rights. I felt like when I came to the US in the 90s that there were actually more opportunities here in the US, and I felt more constrained in Germany. I also have to say I feel like that has gone backwards in the last decade or so. And as I reflect why people, I spend a lot of time thinking about why do people need to marginalize certain groups? What are the motivations, and what are some of the similarities and the differences between Germany and the US? And when Germany was under the Nazi regime and prosecuted Jews, there was a very organized way of going about that, and they actually went after a class that held the reins of the finances in the German country. So they were able to paint this picture of a group of people controlling the wealth in the country, and something needed to be done about that. The way they went about it was very similar of what we've been through in the US, and that is really just stoking that fear and trying to get people fearful and angry and act. As I reflected originally, on some of the suppression of especially people of color in the US, it seemed like that aggression was misguided. It came out of history, but it certainly in recent years was misguided, because that was not a group of people that took wealth from others. That was a completely different group of people that led to a wider gap in our economic wealth. So there was a big difference. And the other big difference was as this country, and I'm still learning about this. I mean, I became so acutely aware how little I knew about the history of people of color in the US, and I'm reading still a lot about it. As people were trying to overcome some of these injustices, there was the continued sentiment that they would have to give something up, and that was really different in terms of what Germany did after World War II. So Germany really took, and still took full responsibility of what they did wrong, and they initiated restoration, and they still pay in restoration. And even Chancellor Merkel still goes out today and speaks about it, what Germany is still doing so many years after the war to make sure that this will never, ever happen again. Even challenging Japan in the process, because Japan never really came out and apologized for some of the atrocities that they did during the war. And so I think Germany was able to go through a healing process for many decades, although right now we have similar kind of flare-ups of extreme right-wing groups as we have in the US. But there's just that part where I think we as a country need to really take full responsibility of what we did to people of color and other marginalized groups. And I think this movement feels more like having attraction to me because it's much broader, it's more inclusive. It's not only people of color, it's many, many marginalized groups. And as a mother of a gay child, I'm also very, passionate of LGBTQ issues. And so having all these groups really peer together and now being more and more represented in Congress, as Congress gets more diverse, I'm really hopeful that this will be something that will be more sustainable and will finally get the results that we still kind of were missing to be fully implemented in the civil rights movement.
Thank you. I know there's been a lot written about recently the similarities of the rise of the Nazis and the rise of the right wing here, and a lot of parallels. It's almost like our president, I guess he's our president, almost to be ex-president Trump, read the Nazi playbook in terms of how he's gone about trying to govern this country. So did you see some of that from your history of understanding German Nazism?
I've been pretty vocal about this for quite some time on social media, that there were very early signs that there are great similarities in the way the psychological strategy is set up and the influence is exerted through social media. And I can say from my parents and my grandparents, a lot of Germans weren't aware of the extent of the wrongdoing of the Nazis until after World War II. I mean, it was certainly there was a lot going on under the radar, as I think is in the US, and I think we're learning more about it, but I'm still very concerned that it runs quite deep.
Thank you, Elke. We're going to go next to Naomi, and Naomi, we welcome you to give your perspectives on the birthday today of Martin Luther King. It is January 15th.
That's right. It's really nice to actually be doing this on the day, and to, as we head into the weekend and with the celebration of different events, and there are a bunch going on in Ann Arbor and with the University of Michigan on Monday. It's nice to do this now. This is a personal topic. I grew up I'm sort of positioned in a place where I'm too young to remember Martin Luther King's marches. I was born the year before he died. And I also, my education, it wasn't until I was in college when in 1986, the Coretta Scott King had worked so hard, along with many others, to make Martin Luther King Day federally recognized. There were states that had been recognizing it from the 70s, but it wasn't until 86. And I remember that was a big thing. So now, as a mother of a 12-year-old, it's interesting how I see how Martin Luther King has been sort of put into the curriculum of young kids' schools. And this is great. But there's, I think, a bunch of us, particularly in this Zoom room, who come at ideas and connections to Martin Luther King in many different ways. I'm now, one of my appointments, I'm a musicologist by training, but one of my appointments is in the Department of Afro-American and African Studies. And I'm actually teaching an introduction to Afro-American studies this coming term. It starts on Tuesday. And I'm still new at teaching this course, but it's been a real pleasure to get to read some of the speeches that Dr. King gave, and to really, it's also a little freaky to see how relevant they still are. As I look over the trajectory of African American history, and I've been thinking a lot about that in preparation for a classes beginning, there's, this hope during Reconstruction after the Civil War that, okay, now we're past slavery and there are all these great things. You see, federal troops are in the South helping to, try to get things going. There's some negative stuff for the South too, with carpetbaggers and the other stuff. But you see the flourishing of historically Black colleges and universities. You see Black people in Congress. You see stuff like that happening. So with Martin, then you sort of move into, of course, there's the reaction with Jim Crow that happened early on in the 80s and 90s. Martin Luther King is born in 1927. And so he's in this generation of sort of the second generation of born frees, and people, after slavery, and yet still realizing, whoa, things haven't happened. He's born in Atlanta, so there's still a lot of difficulties going on in the South. I think only more recently are we realizing that things have been very tough in the Midwest and the North, whereas there was the idea that everything is different and everything is free and everything is equal in the Midwest and North. We know that's not true anymore because we haven't seen the advances, and with different housing discrimination, with different in the whole 1980s, there's the war on drugs and crime. I mean, we're getting a better sense of that. But Martin Luther King is, going through, I like to think of him as, we in a generation of, we should be there, but we're not. So he's leading in the civil rights, and really, they're doing crazy things back then. This idea of, okay, we're going to have sit-ins, we're going to have boycotts, we're going to do things that are kind of unusual. He's impressed by Gandhi. He's gone over to South Africa, or to India. Gandhi had the early part of his career in South Africa, and Martin Luther King actually was speaking out against apartheid. So it's, I don't want to say fun because that sort of limits it, but to me, Martin Luther King, it's like you've got to learn the history. I didn't get that. And then to see, where does he fit in this larger world? One thing I want to talk about really briefly, and as a music person, this is a way I sort of connect, that Dr. Martin Luther King was a singer and also played the violin and piano when he was young. I was just asked by the BBC Music Magazine to write a piece commemorating the 1 year anniversary of Jessie Norman's passing. She died at the end of September in 2019. And it was a wonderful opportunity for me. Oh, actually, I have a PDF. Maybe I'll try to figure out how to put that in the chat in case you guys want to see it. But what I wanted to do with Jessie Norman is to, I've been fortunate that I got to hear her a lot when I'm from New York City, or outside the city. I did my college in the city, so I heard her. It corresponded with the years she was singing a lot at the Metropolitan Opera in the 80s, and that's early 90s. But I wanted to make the narrative about her that she wasn't some very poor Black person growing up in the Jim Crow South where they ate off the floor, and then you had lots of white people discover her as a singer. And from talking to different musicians, reading, watching interviews with her, and I had sort of known this other side of Jessie Norman. She's from Augusta, Georgia, and there was a strong push for music and education. Her father was an insuranceman. Her mother was active in the church. There was this real strong middle class world that Leah was sort of talking about earlier. And so it's not at all surprised that Martin Luther King had this good music background. Coretta Scott King. So Martin Luther King went to Boston University to get his PhD, and he met Coretta Scott. At that point was her name, and she was at the New England Conservatory preparing to be an opera singer.
Wow.
And there's, so classical music is strong in the Black community, particularly as a means of uplift that people, there's obviously a lot of church music, there's a lot of jazz, and there's a lot of classical music. And she decided, and we really need a good biography of Coretta Scott. Hopefully one is in the works, because music was a big part. Very strategically, she gave a few concerts during the civil rights movement, but only to draw attention to that. I am editing a collection of essays and one of them is about the celebration in Atlanta, Georgia in 1939, after sort of for the premiere of Gone with the Wind. So Margaret Mitchell's Gone with the Wind, huge famous book, became a movie. And one of the writers in this collection is writing a bit about how all of Atlanta and Peachtree, sort of the main street, was closed down, and people, it was this big fancy thing. Rhett Butler and Vivian Lee and all the folks came to Atlanta. They were big, it became sort of a little Hollywood. No Black people were allowed to participate or to enjoy the festivities, but they were asked to sort of be the janitors, as well as there was music. And we find out that there was a 10-year-old, this is 1939, a 10-year-old Martin Luther King and the Ebenezer Choir were dressed up as slaves, and they were performing minstrel songs and plantation songs. And so it made me think, for him having to embody this as a performance for Gone with the Wind, I mean, what an interesting musical experience early on. So those were, it's sort of a jumbled thing, but his legacy, I think, is still happening for us today. It's not like we've learned everything about him. And he's still, especially with Coretta Scott King, just died in 2006, so fairly recently. It's like his world is still becoming known to us. And I think I just so appreciate this opportunity to talk about that.
I think, thank you very much. That was a wonderful overview. And I believe, is Ken Fisher still on? Ken, are you there?
Yeah.
Ken, no new Jesse Norman personally, I believe. Is that correct, Ken?
Well, Jesse was an alum of the University of Michigan, and I think UMS presented Jesse, I think 9 times. She was an alum of Interlochen and the University of Michigan. She was here for graduate work in 1968. But just an amazing human being. We were able to give her our Distinguished Artist Award in 1997. Just a remarkable person. And I'm so glad Naomi was able to be part of your panel this morning to enlighten us on so many things about Martin Luther King. And yes, indeed, his wife was studying opera and then got involved in other things. So, and Naomi, I hope everybody will read your book. I mean, it's so important.
Thank you. Just now I'm trying to put the files for that BBC article if you want some beautiful pictures of Jesse Norman. One of the nice things when you publish with a sort of a not academic journal, but a public facing journal, they put nice pictures in.
Let me just mention here that UMS has an archive. If you go to ums.org/archive and write in the name Jesse Norman, I'll put that up here. You can see everything she sang during her number of times here at UMS. Wow. One last thing, I just mentioned to Elke in a private message about Irene Butter, who was a guest on your show, Rob. And this is the emeritus professor in public health. I'll also put her website because she has quite a story about being a Holocaust survivor. And as Elke talked about the situation in Germany, folks should know she's also written a book, From Holocaust to Hope, My True Story. I'll put all that up on the link. Thank you.
And Ken's book, by the way, is in its second printing, Everybody In, Nobody Out. And Ken is personally signing and sometimes delivering this book, people locally. So if anybody would like a copy of that or multiple copies, because it's a great gift. And that's about his experience over the years at UMS, wonderful stories. And so Ken, maybe you could put up a link to your book, which is now in second printing, I understand. So congratulations.
I'll be happy to do that. Thank you very much. So
Now,
look
last one,
to
I'm
the
going to
chat.
get to our final speaker, Lisa Berry. And Lisa is a dear person in the community, really an important person in the community who for many years has been a radio journalist, a radio host, and is bringing heart and soul to radio, to public radio. And I've been privileged to be a guest several times on her show and doing some great things, interviewing local people. WEMU is really our only local public radio station because UOM is, but it's spread out throughout the state and covers the state news. But EMU is covering Ann Arbor and Ypsi pretty exclusively. So appreciate that, Lisa. Maybe you could give your perspectives.
Well, as Naomi just pointed out, it's been almost 60 years since Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. Let's not forget he was assassinated. And I'm sitting in my home where I am broadcasting from due to the pandemic. And right over there is the TV. And a week ago, I watched this thing go down in our US Capitol where 5 people died. And I have to ask myself, what has changed? I mean, I'm the token white girl, let's just be honest. But I have to ask from that position, what has changed? And my African American colleagues that I work with, to hear the pain in their voice after what happened last week. I'm a very sensitive, intuitive, passionate, loving person. And so, yet I go on the air and I try to be objective and I try to say the facts, but I'm a human being and it impacts me and my colleagues to hear the pain in their voice. And the New York Times wrote a piece last week that said, this is us, that this has been going on in our history forever. And I talked to my Black colleague and he says, this is us. And I have to tell him, it's not me, it's not you, it's not everybody. So I call myself a peace seeker and I'm trying to change what I can in the world, one person at a time. And I have this opportunity to be on the air. And since this is a secret society, I'll tell you my secret. I have an intention that I bring to every interview that I do. Let's talk about what's wrong. Let's talk about what's bad. Let's talk about the problems. But can we get to how can we make it better? I mean, if you listen, I always try to get in there. When I interviewed Dr. Pasick last week, I was like, how do we cope? We're in a pandemic. We have all this going on and people are losing their jobs and people are dying. And now this, how do we cope? So that's what I talked to him about. But as far as Martin Luther King's influence on me, King reminds us that love is the greatest force in the world. And yes, I'm a journalist, and yes, I'm a reporter, and yes, I'm a news person, but love, if you choose to focus on it, is the greatest force in the world. So I absorb his reading, his writing, and his speaking that love is capable of transforming hate into love. And he believes that hating people is stooping low and no one should ever fall prey to that. He did a sermon series on love at Ebenezer Baptist Church in Georgia, talked about loving your enemies and love in action and nonviolence. That, how many decades have we been talking about nonviolence? And yet this is still being allowed to happen. And this is still happening. And as Naomi mentioned, he was influenced by Gandhi, but he was also influenced by Thich Nhat Hanh, who is a Vietnamese monk. I don't know if you're familiar with Thich Nhat Hanh. He speaks about love and he speaks about compassion. And in fact, Martin Luther King Jr. tried to nominate him for a Nobel Peace Prize, calling him an apostle of peace and nonviolence, and talked about his clarity and his human compassion. So here I am, I'm on the air and I get to connect to people like you. That's why I worked in the Detroit market. I made a conscious choice to come to Washtenaw County because of all the arts and the people and the intellect and the passion. And I get to interview you all and connect with you and share your stories. And I don't make much money, but I came here for quality of life and I get to share that. And I take it very seriously. And I think about the words that I say on the air because I don't want to add fuel to the fire. because I hear the pain in people's voice and I see what goes on. And yes, I try to be objective and stay out of it, but at the end of the day, I can still feel it. So I want to be a peace seeker. And that's why I do Art and Soul, the art of well-being. Mental health is so important. And, we talk about physical health and working out, and I'm with you. There's a connection. But mental health, we don't talk about it that much. And the human mind is pretty intense. So I like to go in there and I like to use my on-air position to heal and help people. And nonviolence, I told Rob earlier, I'm bringing out my inner hippie, peace and love. You hear those words, peace and love. You hear those words, but do you feel them? Are they part of your life? Do you try to move that way through your day? I feel like I'm giving a sermon. I'm worked up. I've been in my house and I'm really passionate about this. But I mean, think about it. Love is the greatest force in the world. That's what Martin Luther King Jr. said. And that means everything to me. And I try to have compassion and empathy for people of all races and all colors and all ethnic backgrounds and whoever you were born to be. That's a little secret, letting myself slip out there, whoever you were born to be, that we are all connected and that we all need to love each other at the end of the day. And what is happening in our world is not okay. So what can I do as an interviewer? What can I do as a member of this amazing community of Ann Arbor and Washtenaw County and Ypsilanti and Saline and Dexter and wherever you are? What can I do on little WEMU to try to make a difference? And I'll tell you one thing, on the Eastern Michigan University campus, and I will tell you, the Eastern, I don't know if it gets the respect that it really deserves. And I'm a big U of M person. My son graduated from U of M and my sister graduated. The resources and the people that I get to talk to know Ken Fisher and to get to know the rest of you and all the people, it's such an honor for me. And I take it very seriously. But on the Eastern Michigan University campus, there's a Martin Luther King bust. I would go before I went on the air and walk around on campus. And in the spring, the bushes bloom and there's this amazing bust, and they call it, it's a MLK Plaza, and you can feel it. Obviously a feeling person, but you just go. I recommend everyone go check out, especially in the spring when the bushes are all blooming and there's this bust of Martin Luther King. Just sit there for a minute and take it in and think what we can do one person at a time to make a difference. And people, call me a Pollyanna, and people say, "Oh, one person can't make a difference." Well, then what's your recommendation? I'm open. If one person can't make a difference, what can we do? King reminds us that love is the greatest force in the world. That's my influence. That's what I'm hanging on to. And that's what I try to sneak into my weather forecast and my traffic reports if you listen to 89.1 FM in the afternoon. All right. Amen. Pass the plate. I'm so sorry.
Peace sign, everybody. Peace sign.
Yes.
That was one of the best things. Thank you very much, Lisa. Thank you, everybody, for their contribution. I wanted to, I've been reminded of what a great orator, probably the greatest orator of the 20th century was Martin Luther King. And Naomi, I think his sermons and speeches were operatic. Now it's interesting to know that he had that background. I didn't realize that. But I remember the first time I heard a speech, I think it was a speech on Washington. Was that like in 1963 or something like that?
It was a big march on Washington. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was on a ladder painting a house. That was my summer job. And I had the transistor radio on and was listening to CKLW and all the greatest hits at the time. And then I switched over to Martin Luther King's speech, and I just about fell off the ladder. I mean, it was riveting. And I have not heard him in person, but probably on Monday, we will hear a lot of his speeches, including the famous "I Have a Dream" speech, which, and you measure things, a lot of it has happened. When you see some of the great things, I think about my neighborhood, which is, in Ann Arbor, but it's a very integrated neighborhood. And I don't think we would have seen that, I certainly didn't have an integrated neighborhood when I was growing up in the 60s in Oak Park, Michigan. I did have an interesting experience because I went to an integrated high school, Ferndale High School, and I knew quite a few African-American friends. I had friends, but I never went to their houses, and they never came to my house. Well, actually, once they came to my house, but what's interesting is when I go back to the 1964 Talon, the Eagle Talon, and I look at my yearbook, there are only one place where you see African Americans, and that's in the sports pages. But all the other dances and, you know, the places that people just random photos, there's not one photo of an African American student, yet they made up 10% of the class. And I guess you would consider Ferndale a very progressive school at that time, but it's still, we were living in the era of discrimination. We still are, but I think we are making progress. So, you know, we have to look around and be hopeful this time of the year and all the time of the year about some of the things we have done. There's a lot of work to do. I wish I had the words of Martin Luther King. He's a wonderful wordsmith, a wonderful writer. And but we do have hope. I think Lisa and everybody expressed it this morning, and we are individually responsible for what changes happen. So I think we are the change. I don't know who said that, but that is who, you remember who said that, where we are the change that we seek to make?
Was
I
that
don't recall it.
was
I
that
don't know
Gary?
if I got the words right, but I want to do something now. I want to break into small groups so that you each have a chance to speak, because you listened for you know, almost an hour, and I want to give you 10 minutes to break into small groups. This is going to be random. Emily Freund is going to do this by magic. We have a secret society with magic. We're kind of like Harry Potter here, and Emily, can you transport us? We're going to have 10 minutes, and if each of you, the idea is to share your perspectives on Martin Luther King and what you've heard today, and what your personal experiences are. Take it away, Emily. Does anybody want to share any astounding thing or interesting thing that came up in the small groups? Just raise your hand if you want to be, and we want to talk. Okay, Naomi, we'll go with you, and then
Sure.
Sharon.
Just really quickly, I want to thank my group. It was Lisa and Rob. And so Lisa and I were both, you know, on the speakers. So we listened to Rob, but I felt it was a
Not me,
bold,
Rob, but Rob Schiff, you mean?
sorry, the other, yes, Rob Schiff. I just,
Raise your hand, Rob, wherever you are. There you are. Okay.
I feel one of the things that needs to happen, or that I want to see happen in this society, is for us to better understand each other. And probably every single person in this Zoom room would have been a terrific person to have. But Lisa and Rob were particularly great about, they let me say things that were like, you know, Ann Arbor is not always an easy place for me. And it's hard as a Black person, and having my daughter in the Ann Arbor public schools, which, if you don't know this, all Black and brown families are having a hard time with the Ann Arbor public schools. It's another conversation, and there are a lot of people trying to help, but this is a thing on how teachers, and they're, yeah, so that's another conversation. But I just want to thank Lisa and Rob for letting me say things are hard, and it's still hard. And I'm speaking for myself, not for all Black folks, but all Black folks, I think, we're having a hard time, and that what's happening is not always so surprising. And it's, yeah, so I just thank you for the opportunity of this.
Thank you for presenting. I think I'd called on Sharon next.
Yep. First of all, I wanted to thank the presenters, because I thought they were excellent. And I don't participate in this very often, unfortunately, but I really gained a lot from listening today. And I thought I wanted to mention from our group that both Carol and I independently thought to mention the Civil Rights Museum in Memphis that we've both been to. And if any of you have not been there, it had a huge impact on me and my appreciation for Dr. King, and especially, again, that the Lorraine Motel is right there. And also the whole museum that you walk through that gives the whole timeline and history of African Americans going all the way back to before they came to America. And it's really moving and educational. And I urge all of you to go there if you have the opportunity. Don't miss it.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Thank you, Rob.
How was your group? Katrina Studvant, how was your group?
Oh, my group was good. Doug and Jack were part of my group, and we really just kind of connected on a very personal level, shared some history, both with Doug being a runner and me overseeing the Race for the Cure. We talked a little bit about that history, but we even went back to his dad being a graduate of Mumford and just kind of his roots and pull towards Detroit. We ended our conversation, though, with just connecting and seeing how we can serve one another. And it reminded me of a quote that always resonates with me from Shirley Chisholm. And she speaks to service being the rent that we pay to be here on this earth. And that has just always kind of guided my own personal service history and service work throughout the years. So it was a really good conversation. I was really happy to be part of this conversation this morning and to hear such great information being shared, stuff that I learned this morning. And I'm looking forward to reading some of the books that were mentioned and learning more about some of the individuals that were mentioned. So, and I'm going to share this with my daughter who's 16 as well. So thank you. This was really powerful conversation this morning. Great women speakers.
I want to share with you one other resource that's just starting to stream today on radio, on the TV, and that is it's called The Night in Miami.
Oh, already watched it.
Yeah, you already
Absolutely
saw it?
love it. Yes.
Talk about it, Katrina.
Great.
I haven't seen it. Tell me about
You
it.
know, what's interesting is that we're so used to these big box movies that have these various scenarios and have the actors in different spaces. But this conversation happens in a hotel motel space with these four very different but dynamic men, African-American men, who have really left their mark on our community. So it's funny that I watched it last night and you bring it up today. It was powerful. It was powerful. It was funny. It had its comedic side to it. You saw different angles to the personalities that you think you know them. Jim Brown and Sam Cooke and Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X, but you really get to see a different side of them in this particular film. So I recommend it. My husband and I watched it last night. We really enjoyed it.
I started it last night and I was startled by one scene about Jim Brown. And that was amazing.
Well, go ahead. You tell it.
Talking about it, you probably had a different perspective on it. Go ahead, Katrina.
Are you, which scene are you
Well,
speaking to when he was talking about the transition to
the very beginning where he goes to the house of some guy that grew up on the street?
Yeah, no, I mean, you could tell there was a little, he was very reserved, and you could see from his body language and from, that there was something coming, but you didn't quite know what. But then for him to be presented with that, even after such a powerful and welcoming conversation he had in this scene, and I don't want to tell the movie, you see kind of racism at its core, even when the person truly doesn't consider himself a racist. I mean, he really kind of didn't own that. He right. Thought that he was really, like he said, I'm one of your biggest supporters. You know, anytime you need help, I'm here. And so it was kind of a welcoming in, but yet still a pushback and a distancing and a definition of who he is as a white male and who Jim Brown was as a Black male. So very powerful scene.
Yeah, the scene where this white man and Jim Brown are sitting on the porch. I think it's played by Bo Bridges, and he has to do something to move something in his house. And they're sitting on the porch, and the wife calls him, and Jim Brown says, "Well, I can help you move that." And he says, "Oh, I don't let," and he uses the N-word, "into my house."
Well, he said all. Just to add to that, he said, you know the N-word, you all can't come into our homes. He kind of made it inclusive, like that this is a rule.
Yeah.
So
this was in the 60s. Jim Brown was a star in the 60s for Cleveland Browns.
Yeah, I mean, after a very welcoming and loving and open and friendly conversation on the porch that really made Jim feel as if their relationship was deeper than the skin color, right? It was a far-reaching brotherhood that he thought he may have had with this man. And then for this simple thing, just let me help you move some furniture, to then really ignite what that kind of core racism really is, really was profound. So yeah.
I believe Jim Brown was there at the assassination of Robert Kennedy, was he not?
What was that, right?
I believe I recall him being in the room and being next to him during that event, but my memory's a little fuzzy, but I kind of recall that.
I think you're thinking of a different one.
We're going to wrap up because it is 9:45, and this wonderful session will be posted online by Monday, and we will have the whole thing, and I'll write a little bit about it. If the speakers want to write a little bit to me, like just a paragraph about what you said, I'd like to include that, and I'll send you an email about that. And anybody else that want to comment on that and just include that, that's going to be my Dr. Rob Monday newsletter about this experience. And it'll be on the day that Martin Luther King's birthday is celebrated. Thank you all. Katrina, call me. I'll help you with your consulting firm. I'd like to support what you're doing. Anybody else that needs help with their endeavors, that's what I enjoy doing, is helping people achieve their dreams. And I think that that idea of achieving dreams has to go with the I have a dream speech. And we all have a dream, and a dream for our country. I'm excited about President Biden because yesterday he actually articulated a dream for what he sees for the country over the next year. So I was very moved by that. And he has a plan, talking about, he actually has a plan. So it's worthwhile looking at that. So thank you all for presenting. And we look forward to getting together again. Next time we have Leaders Connect, I hope you could join us. If you have ideas for who we should have on or topics, please let me know. Bye-bye, everybody. Be well.